Hey Alex, how's it going? Just wanted to take a few minutes here and send you a quick video recapping some of the things we talked about in our last lesson. Let's start first of all by talking about the drum beat. We've been practicing just a solid eighth note drum beat with 1 and 3 on the bass drum, 2 and 4 on the snare drum, and straight eighth notes on the hi-hat. Something like this. So that's our standard eighth note rock beat with a bass drum on 1 and 3, snare drum on 2 and 4, eighth notes on the hi-hat. We talked about some variations of that. So to practice the variations, we're going to make sure we're counting out loud while we're playing, because we want to count the ands, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, while we're playing. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The reason for that is we want to put our bass drum on the and of 3, so it's going to sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And the second variation was putting the drum beat on the and of 2. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I want you to practice those two variations. The first one, bass drum on count 1, bass drum on count 3, and the and of 3 sounds like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and 1, 3 and 4 and 1. And here is the bass drum beat on the and of 2 and count 2. So it will be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Sounds like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 3. 1 and 3. 1 and 3. Okay? So those are your two variations of our eighth note rock beat. The next thing we're going to practice is our single strokes and our double strokes on our practice pad. Now remember, with our single strokes and double strokes, we always want to do that with a metronome to ensure that we're playing the notes properly and we're keeping everything in time. So single strokes is just an alternating right-left, like so. Double strokes would be 2 hits on each hand. Right, right, left, left, 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 right, right, left, left. So using our metronome, we can keep a nice steady rhythm going. Let's do about 60 beats per minute. I'll do that on the bass drum here. It's roughly 60 beats per minute. Think 1 beat per second. For every quarter note we play on the bass drum, we will have 2 hits on the practice pad. That ensures that we're playing eighth notes on our practice pad while our foot is keeping the quarter note beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Left, right, left, right, left. You can count this any way you choose to. You might want to count it as a grouping of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or count it using and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. The next rudiment is the double stroke. Instead of single strokes on each hand, we're going to have 2 hits on the right hand, 2 hits on the left hand. Now we can do the single stroke as eighth notes, which means we'll do right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left. So it's going to sound very much like what we did before, except we're using the double stroke on each hand. Or we can do the double strokes as not paradiddles, excuse me. We can do double strokes, or we can use the double strokes in a 16th note pattern. So for every beat we hear, we're going to have 4 notes being played on the practice pad. So right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left. So you can actually practice it both ways. Right, right, left, left, 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 right, right, left, left. Everything at 60 beats per minute. Right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right. You can do a combination of those exercises or do them separately. But the key there is keeping a steady beat with your metronome, and I would recommend about 60 beats a minute. If you feel really good with that, you can step it up to 65, 70, kind of work your way up until you get to a point where it's becoming a little difficult, and then back down just a tad, because then you know that's kind of your working point to help you eventually become faster. Now the last rudiment that we talked about is the paradiddle. Now the paradiddle is a combination of singles and doubles. And remember, it uses a pattern like this. Right, left, right, right. So that's the first part. Right, left, right, right. And then we switch to left, right, left, left. Right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. So using our quarter note beat, about 60 beats a minute again, we can use this paradiddle as an 8th note, do it in an 8th note timing, right, right. We can do the paradiddle in 8th note timing like this, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. You can practice it as an 8th note. You can also practice it as a 16th note. Once again, 16th notes would mean there's 4 beats between each bass drum hit. So let me slow this down a little bit. Right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left. So that's your 16th note timing with your paradiddles. So we have our single strokes, our double strokes, our paradiddle for our rudiments. You know the groove that we're going to be practicing. You know the different variations we're working on. And the last thing then, which I will send you pictures of, will be the theory practice. And we talked about playing 8th notes and 16th notes. We introduced 16th notes at our last lesson. We reviewed quarter notes, we talked about 8th notes, and then 16th notes is the newest grouping of notes that we're working on. So once again, keeping a steady beat, quarter notes. This is about 60 beats a minute again. 8th notes, or excuse me, quarter notes are just with the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's move on to 8th notes. 8th notes are now twice as fast. So for every bass drum hit, you'll have 2 notes being played on the pad. So you have a total of 8 notes, 8 different notes being played in a measure. Ready and go. And right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, right, left, left, right, right, left, 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 right, left, right, left, right, left. You notice I did doubles and singles playing those 8 notes. When we do our music theory, we typically use alternating hands. Lastly, let's talk about the 16th notes. We still have our quarter note pulse going. With 16th notes, there are 4 beats within every quarter note being played on the bass drum. 1, 2, and ready and go. And 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. So our theory practice will be using our steady quarter note groove or quarter note metronome and playing along with it by sight reading some notes as we go along the page. I will send you copies of that. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I think based on our work that we did in our last session, I think you can do these without too much difficulty.